Today I'm gonna show you a 2008 American drama film called 7 Pounds. The movie begins with Ben insulting a salesperson over the phone in his beach house. The salesperson is blind, but the blind salesperson calmly ends the call despite Ben's rude behavior. After the call, Ben oddly shouts a list of 7 names, including his late fiancée. Then wrecks a chair and slams it on his coffee table. That night at the IRS office, Ben searches for a person online who requires aid. He discovers the craftswoman with a congenital heart problem and tons of hospital debt. Ben goes to the craftswoman's address, but only to find it empty. Her neighbor says the craftswoman is in the hospital. Then before Ben leaves, he gives a tip to use the banana peel on the soil for the plants to the neighbor. Ben arrives at the hospital, and heads to the cardiac wing of the hospital. Then in the elevator, the craftswoman appears, and enters inside as well. She's dressed in a hospital gown, and Ben follows her. The nurse in the nurse's station asks Ben's intention of visiting. Then he says he wants to visit the craftswoman. But the nurse tells him that visiting hours are over, and he can come back tomorrow. The next day, Ben dreams about attending a meeting, then coming home to his fiancée. But his sleep is disrupted by a phone call from his brother, and checks up on Ben's living state. Then, when the call is about to end, his brother asks Ben if he took something from his brother during Ben's visit, but Ben denies this claim. Afterward, Ben travels to an elderly care facility to see the facility's administrator. He introduces himself as an IRS agent. Ben catches the administrator talking to an old woman, saying she should drink her medicines. After that, the administrator talks with Ben inside the office. The administrator boasts about decreasing the facility's expenses, and then has the money to afford a brand new car. Then the administrator requests Ben to extend his deadline for debt payment. Because the administrator paid for his failed bone marrow transplant, then he pleads with Ben to wait for the administrator's bonus. Ben exits the office, and goes to the old woman's bedroom. He asks her if the administrator is a good person. Then the old woman tells Ben that the administrator is giving her drugs that make her dizzy, and the facility refuses to bathe her as punishment because she doesn't drink her medicine. And Ben instantly rushes the old woman to the bathroom. Then Ben furiously scolds the administrator for his poor management, and denies the administrator's request. Then, Ben meets up with his friend on a golf course, and asks about a doctor, but his friend says the doctor has not replied yet. Then Ben reminds his friend of the plan they made. After the meeting, Ben goes to the hospital's cafeteria. He watches the young patient eating, and playing with his mom on the table. From afar, the craftswoman recognizes Ben, and approaches him. Then, Ben says the craftswoman owes the government a large sum of money. The craftswoman explains she just got discharged from the hospital, and tells Ben that her debt is something she's not ready to ponder yet. Ben understands and leaves the craftswoman alone. That night, Ben rents a motel room for 2 weeks, and inside he reads an old newspaper about a car crash incident where 7 people died. The names mentioned in the paper are the same people Ben's reciting in the beginning. The following day, Ben watches junior hockey players practicing on the rink, and the coach from the sidelines encourages his players in a well-mannered way. Then, Ben visits the craftswoman's home, and feeds her dog a lump of meat, which upsets the craftswoman because she and her dog are vegetarians. Then, they go inside the house to discuss the craftswoman's financial source, health status, and daily living. Then, Ben says he will freeze the craftswoman account for 6 months to buy her time to earn money, with no penalty charge. Ben hands the craftswoman his business card, and tells her to call him if the IRS contacts her. But before Ben leaves, the craftswoman asks why it seems she owes him a big favor, and then Ben says it's because he feels the craftswoman deserves the help. At the beach house, Ben recalls happy memories of his late fiancée on the beach. Then he returns inside, and cleans and organizes the entire beach house. Then that night, Ben transfers his box jellyfish in his motel room. For Ben, jellyfishes are the most beautiful creatures he has ever seen. The following day, Ben's friend meets him at his motel room, and hands Ben a consent form about a kidney transplant. While Ben signs the consent form, his friend suddenly confesses his jealousy back in their youth. Then Ben throws him a book, telling his friend to stop distracting him. He wants his friend to focus on the promise and plan. Then his friend tearfully admits the procedure they are doing is painful for him. After the encounter, Ben visits the specialist for child and family services in the facility. Then Ben asks the specialist for a person who badly needs help but is too proud to ask for one. The specialist gives Ben the Hispanic immigrant's information. Then, the specialist asks why Ben does this, and he answers he's helping. Ben then goes to the Hispanic immigrant's house, then introduces himself as an IRS agent. The Hispanic immigrant is a victim of an abusive relationship, and Ben convinces her to act against the abuse. but the Hispanic immigrant pushes him away, yet still, Ben leaves his business card behind if ever she changes her mind. At the hospital, Ben chats with the coach about the kidney transplant. The coach smiles because there will be no more dialysis for him. Then, Ben brings up about the coach helping some of his players get college scholarships. But the coach humbly brushes it off, and says he only thinks it's best to finally see Latinos on ice rinks. Then the coach asks Ben why he chose him. Then Ben says the coach has integrity, where the coach does good deeds even when no one's watching him. The craftswoman walks her dog, and passes through her neighbor's house, where the flowers beautifully bloom. Then the craftswoman's neighbor says she used banana peels, which Ben advised her to use. When the craftswoman reaches her home, she suddenly feels dizzy and collapses on her porch. Luckily, the neighbor is there to call the ambulance. As for Ben, he follows the blind salesperson, where he watches him play the piano in the public mall. Then he sees the blind salesperson at a coffee shop, trying to promote himself to teach piano lessons to the waitress's son. Then Ben walks up to him, and says the blind salesperson should invite the waitress out, and then Ben mentions the salesperson's name when Ben bids goodnight, which shocks the blind salesperson. At night in his motel room, the craftswoman calls Ben, and tells him what happened to her that morning. Then Ben leaves the motel, heading towards the hospital where the craftswoman is confined. The craftswoman asks him if he's thinking about dying, but he lies, saying not all the time when, in fact, he thinks about it every day. Then the craftswoman requests a happy story from Ben. And Ben tells her a story about a boy named Tim who climbed the tree with a bird costume, jumped down, and broke his arm. Then that was the time where Tim decided he wanted to fly. The craftswoman falls asleep afterward. And Ben arrives in time at the hospital, and sleeps on the nearby chair beside the craftswoman. Then they wake up the following day, and hear the doctor's news about her heart enlargement, and that she only has a little time left to live. So, the doctor made her status a priority. The doctor gives her a pager that will ring when a donor comes up. Ben brings the craftswoman's dog to his motel at night while the craftswoman is still confined. Then the Hispanic immigrant suddenly calls Ben because her boyfriend beat her again. Ben immediately heads to the Hispanic immigrant's location. In the car, the Hispanic immigrant receives a letter and a deed of Ben's beach house from Ben, offering a fresh start for the Hispanic immigrant and her children. He assures her that her ex-boyfriend will never find them again, and he wishes them to live abundantly. The following morning, Ben fetches the craftswoman from the hospital with her dog. While they travel, the craftswoman attempts to flirt and get to know Ben, but he dismisses her, especially when she asks about Ben's love life. Then, the craftswoman eats lunch with her private nurse, who's expressively picky. Then outside her house, Ben weeds her lawn as a form of an apology. The craftswoman accepts his apology, and then she tours Ben to her studio. It's where she keeps her machinery to create letters and invitation cards. Then, she presents Ben the Heidelberg Windmill, 1956, whom she calls the Beast, but it's not working anymore, and she finds it difficult to find someone who knows how to fix one. Afterward, both of them travel to an empty field where she openly expresses her dreams that seem impossible because of her heart condition. Then that night, Ben sneaks to the craftswoman's studio to fix the Beast, accompanied by her dog. He returns home late and sleeps in his motel room. In there, he dreams about flashes of his late fiancée, a car crash, and blood on the road. Ben once again goes to the hospital to donate bone marrow. Despite the painful procedure, he endures the agony just to give it to the young patient he's been eyeing for weeks. Then Ben arrives at the motel, his body aching while he walks. The motel owner asks how long Ben will stay, but he says he's planning on dying in the motel room. On his bed, the craftswoman calls Ben to invite him for a romantic dinner. After the call, the craftswoman's nurse smirks at her. Ben arrives at night, and to his surprise, the craftswoman who never cooks that much makes a meal for him, and even gives him a new set of clothes. Then they eat and laugh at the table. They even share a dance to her favorite music. Then Ben tells the craftswoman his surprise in the studio, and the craftswoman, in shock, sees the Beast working again. They share a slow daring kiss, until Ben remembers his gift for her in the car. Ben heads to his car, but suddenly, his brother is waiting for him outside. Because the Ben everyone knew is Tim. Tim uses his brother's identity as an IRS agent to execute his plan with his friend. He reprimands Tim for stealing his name, and reminds him that it's a crime. Tim tells his brother to wait for him after his date, but then his brother takes Tim's car keys and the ID badge Tim stole. Then Tim returns inside the studio, and the craftswoman waits for him. Tim is ready to leave when the craftswoman approaches him, and locks lips with Tim. Tim then carries her on the bed, removing each other's clothes while doing activities to activate their extreme happiness. After they share the loving session, they chat about their what-ifs in life, and declare their I love you with one another. After their talk in bed, the craftswoman falls asleep, and Tim runs to the hospital. He asks for the craftswoman's doctor, and the percentage for a rare blood type to have a heart donor. The doctor gives him a low rate, then Tim thanks the doctor, and leaves the hospital. Out in the open night with the rain pouring down, Tim calls his friend, and says it's time. When his friend hears this, he cries, knowing what will happen. Then Tim says I love you to his friend before ending the call. Then at Tim's motel room, he calls the blind salesperson one last time, and apologizes for the insults he threw to the blind salesperson from the previous weeks on the phone. Tim says it's the only way to ensure if the blind salesperson is a kind and patient man. Then Tim introduces his friend, who will hand over Tim's present to the blind salesperson. After the call, Tim fills the bathtub with ice. Then he calls the emergency number to inform that he's going to kill himself. Tim then goes to the freezing bathtub, allowing the jellyfish to sting him to death. He chooses electrocution as his method of killing himself to preserve his organs. The movie ends with a surgeon transferring Tim's heart to the craftswoman on the operating table. Then Tim's brother collects Tim's suicide letters from his motel room. Tim's brother gives one letter to the craftswoman, and he explains how he had lung cancer after the car incident. Then Tim donated his lobe to his brother. 6 months later, he donated a part of his liver to the specialist. After their talk, the craftswoman goes to an event, and watches the salesperson performing the piano with a choir. When the event ends, the craftswoman approaches the salesperson, and sees the salesperson is no longer blind. Then the salesperson recognizes the craftswoman because of her post-operation scar. The craftswoman cries because she knows what Tim did to help others, and the salesperson embraces her as his way to comfort her. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to help the channel out.